going on YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte, and it's a little bit of a somber day here on Long Island as the New York Islanders were eliminated by the Carolina Hurricanes in 6 games of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We're going to recap the season for the Islanders, how they did in the postseason, some of the good, some of the bad, and the future of the New York Islanders as you kind of wind down this season for the team. So we're going to take a look at that today. So, I have a lot of thoughts about the Islanders. Of course, this is my team, the team that I've cheered on all season and for my entire life. And the Islanders, there was a lot of potential for this team. It's the way I'm kind of seeing this right now is it's a little bit of disappointment because they aren't advancing. They had a real opportunity to. And a little bit of relief because this whole season has been such a up and down season. You go back to January, February of this season, the Islanders were basically left for dead. One of the bottom 10 teams in the NHL standings, potentially even really looking at tanking for Bedard. And a large majority of the Islanders fan base didn't even give this team a chance at the thought of making the playoffs. At one point they had less than a 5% chance of making the postseason, and they climbed all the way back against all odds, made the playoffs, and they put up a decent fight against the top team in the Metropolitan Division. Now, with that said, it still feels like a missed opportunity because the Islanders really had this thing in their grasp at points, and they just couldn't execute. And that was a real problem for this team throughout the entire series. So, going through the regular season, like I said, the Islanders really weren't given much of a chance. They make the playoffs really against all odds. Matt Barzal goes down with the injury. The Bo Horvat trade back in February, that was a big move for the Islanders and really kicked off the trade deadline season, and that was all Lou Lamoriello. That was a big trade by the Islanders, a huge risk. What if that ended up being a lottery pick either this year or really next year? There's a lot of concern with that, so that was a big risk that the Islanders were willing to take, and in that sense it paid off because they're giving up the 17th or 18th pick or 19th, whatever it is, in this year's draft. I'll take that. I'd rather that than a top 5 pick or a top 10 pick potentially next season. But it still kind of is like, man, that was kind of a missed opportunity. You also look at this team in terms of defensively. They, for the last couple of years under Barry Trotz have kind of compromised the offense for a very defensively sound, defensively structured game. And, it's kind of been the inverse of that this season. It's been a lot more offense, which is good, but also very much at the cost of defense. And the Islanders kind of got beat at their own game a lot of games because they didn't completely stick to the defensive style, and they don't really have the offensive prowess to really take over games just by their offense. And, it's one of those things where, looking at this team, this is going to be a different team in the fall. My predictions for what I think they're going to do in the, going into this offseason is going to be pretty paramount. There's going to be a lot of changes to this group. Some good and kind of some bad, kind of sad. You look at some of the guys that skated for the Islanders in their last game, and, you're kind of saying to yourself, a guy like Zach Parise, Cal Clutterbuck, Semyon Varlamov, Scott Mayfield, Hudson Fasching, Pierre Engvall. At the making of this video, there's no guarantee that any of those pending free agents or a guy like Josh Bailey, will ever wear the orange and blue sweater for the Islanders ever again. And I think that, you kind of look at how this season is unfolded for the Islanders. It's definitely going to be a lot of changes for this team. So one thing that was really apparent for this team is their defensive issues. Now, when Adam Pelech went down with that injury back in December, that was really a big injury for the Islanders and was a huge part of the reason they really struggled in that stretch in December. When Pelech was out, this team defensively really looked bad. And the second he came back, basically, we saw Ryan Pulock's game improve drastically. Romanov got better. Those guys, even if they weren't playing with Pelech on the defensive unit looked better because Pelech was back in the lineup. And that's the effect that a guy like Adam Pelech has on this team. And, the Islanders really needed him to be at his best. And there were times in this series where he wasn't. I look at specifically, was it game? Yeah, actually, it was the final game. It was fitting enough. That overtime goal that Carolina scored, as much of Sorokin was on that goal, Adam Pelech with a bad clear. The Islanders, especially in Game 6, a game they really needed to have, the defense was very much an issue. And even throughout this entire season, Scott Mayfield with a ton of turnovers. Noah Dobson with a very much infamous amount of turnovers. And then you start seeing Adam Pelech with a big turnover like that in overtime, and that's unacceptable. The Islanders were really having troubles against Carolina and a lot of teams getting the puck out of their own end. Teams were very aggressive on the forecheck, and the Islanders had a lot of turnovers, dumping the puck, trying to rim it around the boards to get it out of the zone. There was always somebody on either side, sometimes two guys, and the Islanders were way too predictable, and it costed them dearly, especially in this series and throughout the entire season. Now, looking at the playoff series in particular, I have a lot of thoughts about this series because Game 1, I think Carolina definitely deserved to win that game. A lot of referee stuff, but at the end of the day, Carolina was the better team. Game 2, the Islanders, that game was up for grabs. And the Islanders really, I think, should have won Game 2. That was a big game for Carolina. They started to assert their dominance. They're up 2-0. And it really starts to look good for them. The Islanders that was a missed opportunity. A bad goal by Sorokin, a difficult play by Mayfield. Again, another officiating situation. But nonetheless, kind of a missed opportunity for the Islanders to split this thing heading back to Long Island. Now, the Islanders did win Game 3, and that was a big win for them. Gained some confidence, scored a couple of quick goals late in the third. Very nice win for the Islanders. But Game 4 was really the game that kind of was, not to say the straw that broke the camel's back, but, rhetorically, it kind of did. The Islanders now had 2 games in Games 2 and 4 where this series very easily could have been 3-1 Islanders. Instead, it was 3-1 Carolina, and those missed opportunities in Game 2 and 4, really costed the Islanders. And if nothing else, if it wasn't 3-1 Carolina, at the very least to do damage control, make it 2-2, next thing you know, now you're going into Carolina, you win Game 5, and now you're up 3-2 at the very least, going back for Game 6 on Long Island. And how different would that series be right now had the Islanders been able to pull out that 1-0 lead in the third period and they won Games 2 or 4? We're looking at a completely different narrative and a completely different story. So for the Islanders, it was a series and a season of missed opportunities. Going into the summer now, I have a lot of thoughts because you look at the pending UFAs for the Islanders this summer. Pierre Engvall, Hudson Fasching, and Zach Parise up front. On defense, Scott Mayfield, Samuel Bolduc, Parker Witherspoon. And then in between the pipes, you have Semyon Varlamov. And I think that even guys that aren't UFAs, you're looking at a guy like, I think, Josh Bailey. I think Josh Bailey could potentially, more than likely, be bought out by the Islanders. I think it was very telling that Lane Lambert didn't put him in during any point during this playoff run. He was a healthy scratch throughout the entirety of the Stanley Cup playoffs. He hasn't played a game since, I think, the Buffalo game. He's played 1 game since the end of the regular season. So the Islanders did not put in Bailey at any point. And I think that was very telling that the Islanders and Josh Bailey are likely to see a divorce of some kind, whether it is a trade or a buyout. I think it's more likely a buyout at this point with 1 year left on his deal. The New York Islanders and Josh Bailey probably parting ways. Pierre Engvall, I have a slight sliver of hope that Engvall returns to the Islanders. I think a lot of it comes down to what the Islanders are willing to give him. Engvall's going to want a nice, healthy extension. He's 26 years old, in the prime of his career. He put up some pretty good numbers for the end of the regular season for the Islanders, but is it sustainable? I think Lou Lamoriello is going to have a deep conversation with Lambert about, is his productivity down the stretch something that's sustainable over his career in the NHL? His numbers haven't been all that great. He's been kind of a passenger for the most part in his career in Toronto. He's got a big body, but doesn't necessarily use it all that much. And there is that concern about consistency, especially if you give him a 3 or 5 year extension. There is that concern about that. And the Islanders already have a lot of depth long-term contracts, which does make you wonder, what is the sustainability here? You've already got a Casey Cizikas contract that's a little bit on the bigger side, so can the Islanders afford to have another one like Pierre Engvall there? And another guy that I'm going to mention here in a second, maybe the situation around Zach Parise plays a factor in whether we see Pierre Engvall return. Because if Zach Parise does end up hanging up the skates this year, we'll just get to Zach Parise. He's 38 years old, basically playing on league minimum this season. He got bought out by the Minnesota Wild, signed a 1-year deal with the Islanders last summer, and was really productive with the Islanders. But was very telling the other night after the Islanders were eliminated. He sat in his locker room stall pretty much the entire, they were going around doing, post-game, exit interviews and things like that. And Zach Parise stood at his locker stall for about an hour or an hour and a half. And I think that for Zach Parise, I think that was very telling because, like I said, at 38 years old, after a good season, this might be it for Parise in the National Hockey League. And I think that's something that he's facing, that reality right now, that grim reality that he may never play again. And I think that might be a pretty telling sign as to Zach Parise maybe not returning. So if that is the case, I think that the Islanders are going to have to do some soul searching to figure out, do they want to keep a guy like Hudson Fasching or Pierre Engvall, and maybe look at losing one of those guys and bringing some new blood in free agency. I do not think both Engvall and Fasching will return. I don't think it's likely we see both of those guys return. I think we see one of them return, and they try to bring in somebody new to add to this group for next season. But I do see one of them returning. We also look at Matt Martin and Cal Clutterbuck. Clutterbuck has had a lot of mileage. He's got 2 years left on his deal. Same thing from Martin. I do wonder if the Islanders look at moving one or two or both of those guys, putting them on LTIR to start next season, and they end up kind of soft retiring. I think they've lost a step, and I just don't think they are the players that they used to be. And I think it's a lot of credit to Casey Cizikas. I think his energy brings out the best in Martin and Clutterbuck on the most part. And I really like Casey Cizikas. I think he will return. Maybe I'm a homer because he's probably my favorite player on the Islanders. But I think that Martin and Clutterbuck, I think they could be out as well. And if you're keeping track, I think Parise, Clutterbuck, Martin, and one of Engvall or Fasching will not be back with the Islanders. So we're going to see a lot of turnover in the Islanders' bottom six for next season, as well as Josh Bailey potentially being bought out. Now we go to defense. Defense is kind of interesting for the Islanders. You've got Scott Mayfield, who is a UFA, and Parker Witherspoon. I think they'll let Parker Witherspoon go. He didn't really play much. He didn't really impress the Islanders throughout the regular season when he was called up. I think this is kind of the end of the road for a guy like Parker Witherspoon, so I could see him leaving. Scott Mayfield, I've kind of had him pegged to go to the St. Louis Blues for a while now. They've got some newly created cap space. I could see them going after a guy like Mayfield, who's from St. Louis, Missouri, a St. Louis native, going back to the Blues. He's definitely fits the archetype of a Craig Berube defenseman, and considering their situation over there in St. Louis, I'm trying to remember the defenseman, but he will likely retire, so that will allow a guy like Scott Mayfield to kind of take that spot on the third pair, maybe for $3 million on a 3 or 4 year deal. I do not think we'll see Scott Mayfield or Parker Witherspoon back with the Islanders. I think we will see Samuel Bolduc. He had a rough season this year with the Islanders. I could see the Islanders extending him, but again, with the way his season ended with the Islanders basically being, not playing the entirety of the second and third period for the Islanders after I think it was an elbowing penalty, or he did take a very weak penalty, a penalty he should not have taken. I could see that potentially leading to Bolduc getting an extension with the Islanders, but not really sure about the longevity there with how he performed. The Islanders really don't have much in the system. I think the Islanders are going to have to do some soul-searching defensively, trying to bring in some guys to replace Mayfield, get a better defenseman alongside Dobson or Bolduc next season. You look at Bodie Wild, who's in the system. The Islanders haven't played him. He's obviously had the bug situation and not getting vaccinated, so that's obviously played a factor. I don't know if we're going to see Bodie Wild play for the Islanders. They have Cale Odelius. We could see him in Bridgeport next season. I don't think he's ready for the NHL. Other than that, they've got guys like Dennis Cholowski, Grant Hutton, Robin Salo. I don't think there was anything impressive with those guys. Paul Ledoux. The Islanders are going to have to find somebody in the free agent market. The question is, what's the price going to be? But I think they're going to look that route. In terms of guys in Bridgeport that could come up, Otto Koivula, I could see him getting a shot with the Islanders next season. William Dufour is another one I'd look at. Ruslan Ishakov. He's a 22-year-old prospect, led the Sound Tigers in points, I think, last season, behind Andy Andrioff, who was really good. So I look at guys like Andrew Andrioff, Arno Durando, Otto Koivula, Ruslan Ishakov, and William Dufour. Those are 5 or 6 guys in the Islanders system in Bridgeport that could fight for a spot on the Islanders roster next season. I think maybe 1 or 2 of those guys gets in. And if I had to pick today, I would go with a guy like Ruslan Ishakov, maybe to take the role of like a Zach Parise or a Pierre Engvall, maybe on the third line, maybe on the second line if they need to. Ruslan Ishakov could do that. Also look at a guy like William Dufour, who could also be fighting for that spot. And in the bottom 6, I do look at guys like Andy Andrioff, Arno Durando, and Otto Koivula, looking to maybe replace, quote-unquote, the identity line alongside a guy like Casey Cizikas. So that's kind of what you're looking at for the New York Islanders' future. In between the pipes is a very interesting question. I really am confident that the Islanders will keep Ilya Sorokin and Semyon Varlamov together. Varlamov is a UFA, but I think this falls onto Varley at this point. He's 35 years old. He's coming off of a 5-year, $5 million per season contract. Is he willing to take less to stay with Sorokin and the New York Islanders? I think that's going to be the big question for Varley. He did get a lot of starts down the stretch. I think the Islanders do want to really keep him here. I think he's a really good goalie. He's been good for the Islanders. One of the best tandems in the NHL since Sorokin came in there has been Varlamov and Sorokin. They're really good buddies with each other. I think Varlamov is going to have to assess, can he be a 1A somewhere? Because I don't think he's going to be a full-time starter anywhere. But can he be a 1A somewhere? And if he thinks he could be a 1A somewhere and get 1A money and maybe play on a lesser team and finish out his career that way, then maybe he'll do that. But I think he has to face the reality that he isn't that. And no matter where he's going to go, he's likely going to be a 1B or a full-on backup at best. And I think that when you're looking at Varlamov, I think this is the best environment for him. But if it comes down to money and he's really wanting to be a starter somewhere, he's got to align the priorities there. And if he does really see a good fit with the Islanders, he likes playing with Sorokin, he thinks that the Islanders have a real opportunity to do something special next season, I think he'll stay with the Islanders. But I think there is definitely the possibility that he does leave this team as well. It just depends on, I think, what the Islanders think of a guy like Jakub Skarek, who's coming up in the system. You know, he's kind of had a weird career. with the Islanders. His numbers this season in Bridgeport have not been inspiring. He has not put up a .900 save percentage in the American Hockey League now for the past 4 seasons. So is there really a future for him as a backup? He's already 23 years old. I just don't know if there's much of a... I've been saying that Skarek would take over Varlamov as a backup. I just don't know if that's the case anymore. But I do think there's some future there. Looking at the Islanders' future as well, I think the lineup looks a little bit better with Wahlstrom probably back in the lineup next season. If I had to guess in terms of, we're going to do this throughout the summer, but if I had to look at opening night rosters for the Islanders right now for next season, you definitely have a more promising future than I think people are leading on. I think Ruslan Ishikov and William Dufour are good prospects for the Islanders. They're not top-line guys, but I think good second, third-line scoring to really replace guys like Engvall and Parise. I'm interested to see what those guys do. I think they could make the Islanders lineup next season. One of those two guys. Like I said, I like guys like Otto Koivula. If he could just figure out the skating thing, that is a concern. But even with that, I think a guy like Andy Andrioff, it should definitely get an opportunity with the Islanders. Reese Newkirk, Blade Jenkins, all of those guys have been kind of mulling around in the AHL. I think they're going to get an opportunity next season. The Islanders have a lot more... again, a lot of people look at the top prospects and they definitely aren't there, right? They don't have their own first-round pick this year. Their last couple first-round picks have been so-so. But we've seen an emergence from Simon Holmstrom. I think there's a lot of excitement around what he could be as another kind of depth guy that fits the Islanders system. I think there's a lot of excitement around Holmstrom. Dobson definitely regressed this season. He's really got to work on the turnovers. I think he's got to work on his hockey IQ, really read that film this summer and take it to heart and really improve some aspects of his game. And maybe, taking more of the approach of before he gets the puck, knowing where to go with it. We talk about that a lot in baseball, right? Like if you're a second baseman, before the ball is even hit to you, do you know where to throw the ball? First base, second base, third base, where are you going with the ball? I think Dobson kind of needs to do that in the hockey side of things. Knowing where to go with the puck before he gets it. And I think that's some of the adjustments that we could see to develop his game. He's a very talented player. He's shown a lot of prowess offensively, but there are some real defensive breakdowns from Dobson's game that is a real liability for the Islanders and has to improve. Alexander Romanov, throughout the first stretch of the season, I think he was still adjusting to Lane Lambert and the Islanders and the environment. He looked really good for the Islanders. I'm really excited to see him. He's a big defenseman. He definitely fits the Islanders' DNA for a blue liner, right? Fitting alongside the likes of a guy like Johnny Boychuk, and now most recently guys like Adam Pelech, Ryan Pulock, and now Alexander Romanov. That core three I'm really excited about for the New York Islanders blue line. Also, Ryan Pulock was the best defenseman in the first round series for the Islanders. He was incredible for the Islanders. I'm really excited for what he is going to do in the future for the Islanders. Him and Pelech is such a good pairing. Adam Pelech definitely gets the most out of Pulock, and you saw that when Pelech was down with that injury. Ryan Pulock is a really good defenseman, but he's even better with a guy like with Adam Pelech there. Ilya Sorokin, I'm really upset with the way he played during the postseason. He really was upset with himself after that goal. Between the Game 2 goal in overtime and the Game 6 goal in overtime, he's definitely, you could tell he was looking at the rafters. He was upset with himself, and I definitely feel for him there. Offensively, listen, Bo Horvat, 2 points in 6 games. He scored a meaningless goal in Game 4. He got an assist on Matt Barzal. The Islanders brought him in to be a difference maker, and he was not that down the stretch and throughout the playoffs. The Islanders need to make some adjustments on the power play. They need to get the most out of Horvat. He's here for the next 8 years. They need to use him as a bumper down the middle of the ice on the power play. That is how he is utilized. That is how he scored goals in Vancouver, and the Islanders need to adjust to the player. Because being very stubborn with their system, it hasn't worked. The Matt Barzal runs the power play, and everything else kind of falls beyond that. hasn't worked. The Islanders' power play is abysmal. They need to use Horvat in the situation that he is best utilized. The Islanders have a lot of things to work on. Do they bring back Lane Lambert? I think that's a great question. I honestly, I was not thrilled with Lambert. There's some promise there. Was the roster good enough? No. But I think there's definitely something to be said about maybe looking at the environment and to see what's out there before making that decision. But as of right now, I was not a huge fan of Lane Lambert, and I would not be against the Islanders letting him go. With that said, I do understand the idea of patience. You need to give things time. A lot of these guys didn't adjust to the Lambert system till midway through the season. But even in the second half of the season, it never really seemed like there was that buy-in to Lane Lambert's system. There was way too many times where the Islanders really didn't look motivated when they maybe should have looked more motivated and should have played more meaningful games better. They just didn't look like they were involved or in tune with some of these games, and I think a lot of that fell on the lap of Lane Lambert. But let me know what you guys think down below. What do you guys think of the New York Islanders? Really disappointing end to the season, but I am excited for the future. I do look at teams breathing down their neck like Detroit, Buffalo, a lot of teams, really. I mean, honestly, even with the decline of Pittsburgh and Washington in the Metro, the emergence of the Devils this season, like I said, Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, in the Atlantic, talking about wild card positions, those are going to be tough teams to play against. I do worry about what the Islanders are going to look like going into next year, and Columbus, I don't know, man. I definitely have my questions, and I think rightfully so. But let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time.